Tonight on Living St. Louis. Where did you go to high school? If the answer is Cleveland High School, don't touch that remote. In fact, you don't even have to be a Dutchman to relate to the history of this school. It's all things Cleveland. Next on Living St. Louis.
Funding for KETC local productions is provided in part through the generous support of the Arthur and Helen Baer Charitable Foundation. And this Emmy Award-winning program wouldn't be possible without your support. Thank you to the members of Channel 9. You make it possible.
I did not grow up in St. Louis, so when I first heard the question, where did you go to high school, I didn't understand why that mattered so much. These days I get it. And thanks to Kara Vaninger, I understand on a whole new level. Here's her deep dive into Cleveland's history and the stalwart alumni preserving its legacy.
Just a few blocks from Ted Drew's and the Feasting Fox, there stands a castle.
If you're driving by, it can go easily unnoticed, set back beyond an expansive activity field. But the impressive building with its soaring towers and stately windows was once home to Grover Cleveland High School, still referred to by alumni today as the Castle.
Once the young, beating heart of the neighborhood, Cleveland was constructed in 1915 as part of a citywide public school building campaign. Many of the schools built during this era are architectural gems, designed to provide a healthier learning environment and inspire a sense of pride and possibility in students, many of whom never imagined they would have the opportunity to go so far in their education.
High school was not common education. In fact, in the 1870s, most children started work at age 10 or 11 in the city, so they couldn't dream of even finishing grade school, yet high school. The first public high school was started in 1853 by the St. Louis school system, and that was Central High School. And then in 1875, Sumner was started because the system was segregated. And Sumner was the high school for children of African American descent. But only a small fraction of children African American or of European ancestry could go on to high school. In the 1890s, nationwide, there were only 44,000 graduates of high school in the whole nation. That's how unique high school education was. Right after the turn of the century, you see this big boom in high school building in St. Louis. Opening Cleveland in the Dutchtown neighborhood opened up the possibility of high school to many more young people in the far south part of the city. Eventually, we have a whole slew of high schools serving the entire city and convenient to neighborhoods throughout the city of St. Louis.
The early 20th century saw war, economic extremes, and new labor laws contribute to an accelerated change in the developmental trajectory of American youth, and education began to be viewed as more of a necessity than a luxury. Public compulsory high schools sprung up all over the country, the modest one-room schools giving way to stately brick buildings, providing young people with new academic opportunities, athletics, social clubs, and not to mention lots and lots of peers, all as hormonal and emotionally tenuous as each other. As the economy improved, after-school jobs became less about contributing to the family and more about disposable income, which meant gas money, date nights, and modern fashion for this newly born stage of life, the teenage. And high school became the stepping stone between being a child and all that lay beyond. High school was, and still is, one of the most formative times for young people in America. And for many years in St. Louis, a city defined by its distinct neighborhoods, it was also a source of identity, shorthand for where and how someone grew up.
And if someone's answer to the high school question is Cleveland, then they most likely grew up in or around the Dutchtown neighborhood.
Author and urban historian Nene Harris has spent her life documenting the neighborhood and ethnic histories of St. Louis and explained that the Dutch in Dutchtown was actually a mispronunciation of the word Deutsch, referring to the large number of German immigrants that helped to settle the area.
You see those influences. You see a few people, secessionists, who did not like these German immigrants who were loyal to the Union, but the largest group by far are the Germans. And the Germans are called Deutsch, and it goes back to the Civil War. They just did not get their name correct.
Built on the grounds of what had once been a wealthy landowner's vineyard, Cleveland High School graduated its first class of Dutchmen in 1916.
The building has these crenellated towers that tower over the neighborhood, and it spoke of the neighborhood. The beautiful Mercer tiles over the doorway show craftsmen. Well, that's what South St. Louis was at that time. It was made up of a lot of working people who developed skills and crafts. And so the medieval craftsmen shown in these tiles really are the ancestors of the people who were living and working and building South St. Louis at the time. The school was designed by William Ittner, and his father and uncle were brick manufacturers, and his grandfather was a bricklayer. There's like a diamond pattern in the brickwork, but only on the third floor. So you've really got to look at it in a certain light, and then you see these beautiful designs in the building.
The decades surrounding the school's construction also saw Dutchtown develop into a working-class neighborhood, filled with small, affordable brick homes.
In St. Louis, the progressive era expressed itself in the development of housing for regular people. This area survived, for instance, the Depression, comparatively very well, because the people had bought their own small homes and largely paid them off by the time of the Depression.
There are friends of mine who grew up in the South Side who married someone from the South Side, and oddly enough, they seem to have moved like equidistant. You know, here's one set of parents, here's the other, we'll buy a house right here so we can see. And then they stayed there. So it kind of created a kind of community.
A lot of our parents worked together at AB, you know, I mean, that was a big thing. A lot of people, you know, worked at Anheuser-Busch. You know, you'd get together at their gatherings and then you'd have your stuff. We were tight back then.
My mother was moved to the South Side, literally next door to my father when they were both kids on Michigan Avenue. And then they went to Cleveland. To me, it was, the high school was where I was going to go. I knew that when I was in grade school.
As the 20th century moved on, high schools became a very real anchor for the neighborhood that they served, providing the young people who lived there with opportunities beyond a useful education. After-school clubs were intensely popular, giving students a peer-driven, character-building environment where they could explore creative, athletic, intellectual, and philanthropic activities. For many, the clubs were a safe place to be after school and provided focus and direction in their lives.
I interviewed one man who belonged to the radio club at his high school, and then in World War II became a radio man for the Navy. He helped rescue the survivors of a sunken ship because of the radio club. They had rifle clubs. Now this is a phenomenal thing. At times they brought their rifles home on public transportation and then would carry their rifles in their rifle cases on St. Louis streetcars to go to Cleveland High School. Times are different. They change.
The 1980s was a decade of change for Cleveland, starting with its busing partnership with Soldan High School. Cleveland was a predominantly white school, Soldan predominantly black, and in the name of integration, students from both schools were sent to the other, leaving their friends, sports teams, traditions, and neighborhoods behind. There was inevitable tension on both sides, but eventually, faculty and staff saw most students begin to settle into their new environments, making friends and contributing their academic, creative, and athletic talents to their new schools. In 1984, Cleveland took on a new shape as an ROTC Junior Naval Academy, but the crippling heating bills and endless maintenance couldn't be reconciled with the declining enrollment, and the castle graduated its last class in 2006, when the ROTC school was moved to a more manageable location. Once it closed, there was no budget for security or maintenance, and over the years, the work of thieves and vandals exposed the building to the elements, accelerating its decay by decades.
A good portion of the roof at Cleveland, especially over the beautiful theater, was a flat roof. As such, it had flashings that kept it in position. And these were taken. People climbed up on the roof with ladders, at great risk to themselves, but just to get the scrap metal and sell it. When that happened, it enabled the wind to get underneath the membrane and blow the membrane off the roof. It's quite a large area, so there's a lot of now access for rain to get in the building. And so just for, a few dollars of scrap metal, tens of thousands of dollars of damage were done to the roof and even more to the building itself from the water penetration.
I don't have nostalgia for that building. I was there in 1960 and 1964. I mean, dinosaurs walked up and down the street when I was there. Do I remember a lot about high school years? Yeah, I remember driving to Steak and Shake. I remember parties. I remember going to Velvet Freeze with my friends. But do I remember a lot about classrooms and classroom activity? Nah. I was this photographer for the Orange and Blue for 3 years. It was my excuse to get out of classes. Somebody come get me and say, you got to go make some pictures. I go, great. I roamed that school with my camera.
After years of living away from St. Louis, Dan returned to the city and is now a professor of art at UMSL. When offered the chance to step back inside his old high school, he naturally brought his camera along.
In 2009, when I went there the first time, it was a big event, and all alumni and a bunch of people went, and I went, and like an idiot, I forgot my tripod. And I walked in and walked around and go, I can't make pictures here, it's too dark. And I didn't bring a tripod, and so I'm upset. And I wandered back to where people were sort of standing in the front hallway, and I said, is there any chance I could come back? And luckily, Mr. Jackson, the custodian, was there, and he said, oh, sure, here's my cell phone, call me when you want to come back. He had nothing to do. They didn't give him any money to fix anything, and he wasn't really a security guard, he was just kind of there. And so he was bored. And so when I went, he went with me, and we talked the whole day. And then I went down and had lunch in his little office, with him. And I provided the entertainment for that day for him.
After several months of exploring and documenting the school, Dan offered his junior and senior students the chance to join him, eventually compiling and publishing their photographs as a book.
For all those times that I was there, I was photographing the grand scenes, big classrooms, that sort of stuff. So I told them, so that the book would have some sort of other sense to it, that they should photograph details. And so the latter part of that book, their part, is all about the little details.
Several years later, Dan had hoped to photograph further changes in the building, only to find out that Mr. Jackson had died and that his position as guardian had been left vacant. His next opportunity to step inside the castle was in 2015, when a series of public open houses were held at several closed schools, including Cleveland.
The district held what we term the Building Revitalization Collaborative, and it was an effort to open all the closed schools to the community, in particular the neighborhood stakeholders, so that they could come in, walk through the building, and then give us feedback as to what they'd like to see it become. In most cases, these are not going to be reopened as schools, but the district is actively interested in having both community feedback and professional technical advisor feedback on opportunities and possibilities for the buildings to have a second life as something else.
Although the main goal was to attract potential investors and new ideas, by far the biggest turnout for the Cleveland walkthrough was alumni. Hundreds showed up to walk their old high school halls again, and the heartbreak was obvious.
When we were here, it was glorious. It was the castle,
And now this is just a mess.
It just breaks your heart, because this is when you were a teenager. Everything's cool and you're innocent, and you don't think that in 30 years it's going to be crumbling. And you just think it's going to be there forever.
It's
sad state of affairs. This is just horrible.
This was a beautiful place. It was really a cool
We
place.
had a blast going to school here.
It was like a big family. It was like a big family. Wait.
Yeah.
This school was a really important part of my life. We had kind of a rough family life, and we devoted all of our time. We didn't want to go home, so we just came to school, and we did everything here. All of our friends were here.
For me, I think just some of the incredible teachers we had there are probably my fondest memories. You know, just being able to know that somehow I became a better person because of not just the teachers, but the counselors, you know, the administration. They were all just really good, devoted, you know, educators.
Sisters Kay and Patty Zimmer have maintained an abiding love for Cleveland that has only grown in the years following their graduation. Their passion for their fellow Dutchmen and the natural inclination they all had towards consistent reunion was the core of the Alumni Association, which maintains a database of Cleveland graduates and seeks to keep everyone connected through activities and newsletters. An outgrowth of this has been the Cleveland Room at the Carondelet Historical Society. When the school made the shift to Junior Naval Academy, alumni rescued trophies, books, and other mementos from the dumpsters and went back to reclaim more when it closed for good. Members and families of those in the Alumni Association have donated countless yearbooks, photos, uniforms, and class rings to keep the spirit of the school and their loved ones alive. Kay carefully preserved and displayed every item, with one very personal exception, her own class ring.
I had a Russian exchange student named Lena. All the other seniors were wearing their new class rings, and she was just so bummed because she didn't have a class ring. So I let her wear it, and she just wore that thing so proudly all year. And when she was having to go home, she was just kind of holding the ring. I could see that it was really going to be a struggle for her. I said, I got a great idea. Why don't you take that home with you? Oh, I can't do that, Kay. I said, yes, you can. I'm giving you the ring. And I know that it's going to be safe and it's going to be in a great place, and I had a wonderful time with you. So she has it. It's now in Irkutsk in Siberia. That's where my Cleveland ring is.
I just want people to come in here and be able to flash back for a little bit and hopefully focus in on fond memories of when they were at Cleveland, and to know that, you know, our memories are preserved here. If ever you just need a place to come just to kind of chill out and get some positive feedback, this is the place, because there's something here for everyone. We have all of our sports are represented here, all of our activities, everything's here. So you can go over to a certain corner and sit there and just reminisce if you want.
I still have my baton, but my thing is rotted off. No, I still use it when I exercise. Sometimes I'll go through the routine.
My parents were both graduates of the castle, so I asked my mom to join me on a visit to the Cleveland Room.
This is an amazing room. Someone's put a whole lot of work into this, and I just love all the photos and the progression. You know, it's truly historical. It's great to come here today.
Though my mom and the ladies who volunteer in the Cleveland Room started out as complete strangers, all having graduated in different years, they immediately bonded over their shared past as alumni, as majorettes, as kids who grew up in South City. This bond has been consistently shared between some graduates for as long as 70 years. It doesn't matter if they're in the same classes or on the same sports teams, they all had spent time at the castle, and they all wanted to remember those times.
What we're trying to do is show everybody that even though our building is trashed and it's fallen apart, we are Cleveland High School. And there are probably like close to 3,000 of us that all still stay together. We try to remember our fun times there and all the coolness that was our youth.
I did not go to Cleveland, yet I would hear from the kids going to Cleveland and later from the alumni all these great stories. These teenagers felt absolutely honored to go to Cleveland. They talked about it like you hear, well, I've heard people talk about going to Ivy League colleges with less pride than kids from the Dutchtown neighborhood talked about going to Cleveland High School. That was a remarkable phenomena.
My biggest memory is just an overall memory that I grew up in a castle, and our motto was to learn honesty, industry, courtesy, and loyalty. I was there when it was beautiful. That was what made me part of what I am.
The teachers were awesome. You grew up so much. I can't imagine not going to Cleveland. It's just been such a wonderful influence and so many friends. Still friends with a lot of them that I went to school with.
I met my life's love there in my senior year, although we had been all 4 years together. He was kind of shy, so I didn't really notice him. Our senior year, we put on a senior auditorium. And so Stan, who was shy, I'm not sure why he did it, but he and his friends tried out. The Beatles were just coming on the scene, and his mom made full Beatle costumes for them. And of course, the girls started screaming when they heard the Beatles song. And that, since Elvis, that was kind of the thing, but it still wasn't very accepted by the older generation. And so his skit was cut.
We twirled the baton at the games. You know, the Palm girls did their thing at the games. Just hanging out with a whole bunch of kids, laughing. And
it was more fun than you can imagine. You could ride with the boys in the band on the bus.
I remember one time I was chosen to lead all the majorettes, and we had 2 routines, and I gave the signal for one, and I promptly did the other one. So I'm sure I confused the whole group in back of me, but they were great. They followed my instructions, and I just did my own thing. But we had a good time, and that was at Roosevelt High School, which was our arch enemies.
While the Cleveland Room is meant to be a trip down memory lane, the Alumni Association focuses more on reunion activities, as well as what members accomplished after their years at the castle.
We have created this new honor, which is the Wall of Fame. This is our way of honoring those people that have gone on and done outstanding things. This year we had over 71 nomination forms, and when you read through them and you see their accomplishments, your mind is just blown by how much has been done by our Cleveland Dutchmen.
Cleveland's just part and parcel of who we are. No college or anything else would ever replace that high school.
I come down here just so that those that did go there, no matter what year, there is a history that will maintain as long as someone's interested.
I had my grandkids down here, all of my kids, and they're like, wow, Grandma. I'm like, yeah, it's cool, isn't it? I've got to keep sharing. We all need to keep sharing because the past is gone, and we just need to make sure our kids know about it.
This year, the castle celebrates its 100th anniversary and continues its vigil over the now silent football field and the streets that so many of its graduates once lived and played on as children.
Its future, like that of many other older city school buildings, is unknown, but the hope of all involved is to preserve these architectural and historical landmarks for future generations.
In the meantime, the loyal Cleveland Dutchmen continue to meet and celebrate their school, knowing that they are the physical manifestation of everything it was built to accomplish.
Funding for Living St. Louis is made possible through the Mary Rankin Jordan and Eddie A. Jordan Charitable Foundation and through the generous support of the members of KETC.